sorting mechanisms. Well, one of the things we looked at is whether we could find evidence for self-selection. In order to do this, we simply asked a large group of UCLA students how attractive certain kinds of careers were to them after they graduated from college. And the careers are things like working as a lawyer for the prosecutor's office, working to enforce the law, the FBI, or working to enforce, improve the profits of business. Or AHA institutions, AHA careers, working as a civil rights lawyer, working as a lawyer for those defending, not able to afford their own lawyers, advocate for human rights, etc. And what we next did was simply look to see whether or not there was a correlation between people's desires to support and establish and maintain hierarchical organizations and SEO, net of everything else. And we in fact found evidence for such correlations. That is to say, the more people wanted to dominate other groups and maintain group-based dominance, the more attractive they found these careers to be. And the obverse for hierarchy attenuating institutions, the higher their SEO scores, the less attractive they found these careers to be. We found evidence for institutional selection. That is to say, a tendency for institutions to pick out and select people for their personnel, those with either hierarchy-enhancing or hierarchy-attenuating values, depending upon the value of the institution. And I don't have enough time to show you all the details here, so I'll skip over this. You'll have to trust me that there is such evidence. Institutional socialization, that is to say, the more people are in certain kinds of institutions, the greater the changes in the values and the ideologies of the workers or personnel in various directions. And this I will give you some data in support of. There was an interesting study done by Teahan in 1975, looked at the racial attitudes of 97 police officers who were recruited into the police academy, and they followed these officers over an 18-month period. And what they discovered was that the longer they were in the police department, the longer the training went on, the more xenophobic against African Americans they became. A similar and more modern study was conducted by Chevigny in 2000, looking at attitudes towards foreign immigrants among members of the Canadian military. And what they found was that the negative attitudes, as marked by this scale here, the higher the level, the more negative the attitudes towards the immigrants, after 4 years was higher than it was in inception. So if people stayed in this military training for 4 years, they became more negatively oriented towards foreigners. However, this effect was moderated by the degree to which the officers actually identified with their military roles. So the more they identified with the military roles, the more prejudiced they became towards immigrants. Differential rewards, or differential rewards. A study done by Leitner and Sedlacek in 1976 found that racial prejudice was positively and significantly correlated with performance evaluations of police officers. That is to say, everything else being equal, the more racist the officers were, the more likely they were to get strong, positive job recommendations from their supervisors. Similar findings were found by Paul Chevigny in an ethnographic study he did in the United States, Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico. That is to say that the more these police officers in these various countries were brutal towards members of the subordinate members of the society, the more likely they were to be promoted. we decided to follow up on this, and this will be the last thing I have time to show. That what seems to be happening is that if people in hierarchy-enhancing organizations show the proper behaviors, they'll be rewarded. And if they do the same thing in hierarchy-attenuating institutions, they'll be rewarded. We wanted to see whether or not that tendency would generalize to an environment like the college campus. So we took a data set from the University of Texas, about 5,000 students from the University of Texas, and looked at their racism scores and classified them in high and low racism categories, and looked at their college majors, and were able to classify them into he categories and ha categories. And argued that ha majors, warm and fuzzies, who had low racism scores were congruent, or those with he majors and high racism scores were congruent, and these people on the diagonals, or the off diagonals, were incongruent. And our expectation would be that for all of the congruent students, that is to say, for those students for whom there was a consistency between their racial beliefs and the kinds of majors they have, they would be getting higher scores, be more rewarded, have higher GPAs than those who are incongruent. And that's basically what we found. By the way, you might be interested in what ha and he majors are like. These are ha majors. These are he majors. This I have to go for. And what the data show here is that if you look on the x-axis here, this is the GPA of the students. This is whether they were incongruent or congruent. And the data basically show that as students become more congruent, there's a greater consistency between their racial ideologies and their majors, the better off they do in school. We replicated the same findings several years later at the UCLA and found the same basic phenomena. The greater the students' congruency, well, whether they were congruent or not, was associated with their GPAs. That is to say, showing the proper attitude, if you're in the proper environment, leads to rewards. Conclusions, as I'm going over time. So we're concluding that rather than being an extraordinary event, intergroup violence and terror are really chronic of low-level aspects of intergroup interaction. Under normal circumstances, this intergroup violence and terror are enacted by hierarchy-enhancing social institutions such as the criminal justice system, and in part have as their result the creation and maintenance of hierarchical group relations. To help ensure the enactment of these institutional violence, personnel with the appropriate behavioral predispositions, that is to say, a dislike or support social inequality, will tend to be disproportionately allocated to hierarchy-enhancing or hierarchy-attenuating social roles. And the allocation of these people to the appropriate social roles will be achieved by four mechanisms, including self-selection, institutional selection, institutional socialization, and differentiable